Okay, this is the third tape
Yes.
of however many we do on this trip. And let's see. I just want to make sure there's not something on the lens. I don't see anything on the lens. Nope, everything looks
Okay.
cool. Okay, so when we left,
When we left off,
the
the
German
German had
officer-
just pushed my brother against the wall
Well,
and
the-
said, "Stay here."
right.
And, oh yes, the maid came down at 7 o'clock, and I believe she must have known already. Maybe not, because the concierge is on the ground floor and she lives on the 6th floor. Anyway, about 9 o'clock or so, I told my brother that I was going to, following my father's directive, go see that person, that man that he had, this business associate that he had told me about. And my brother said, "Well, hurry back, because I want to go see somebody." He had a friend. I don't know if that was the one he wanted to see. He had a friend who was a German refugee. His parents, rather, were German refugees. His mother was Aryan and his father was Jewish. And they had fled Germany in their 30s. And their son was a friend of my brother. And I think that's the one he wanted to go see. Obviously these people were in no position to help. Because they themselves were refugees to begin with. And anyway, at that point my brother said, "Hurry back, because I want to see some friends." And I think those were the ones he wanted to see. Be that as it may. I said, "Well, I'll go see this person and come back as soon as possible." And I left and I came back. I thought yesterday was around noon, maybe between a time frame between 11 and 1, maybe something like that. It was
And you,
midday.
but you had gone and seen this.
I had gone and seen that man.
You'd
and
taken the subway?
Oh yes, yeah. There was no the subway or the bus were the only forms of transportation. There were no cabs. There was no private vehicle or traffic except for emergency personnel like doctors and and they wouldn't even get gas ration. They had those propane tanks mounted on the roof of the car, 2 tanks. I believe it was propane, and I would fuel the engine. Anyway, I did take the subway to go see this person, talk to him, got the, "I'm sorry it happened," kind of response, and went home. And I found just Maria, the maid, and my sister. Nathan wasn't there. And I asked where he was. And the maid, it turned out, had gone for grocery shopping in the morning, as she did every day, run errands and grocery shop. And she came back and told my brother that a number of Jews who had been arrested that morning by the Germans were being detained in the mairie du 16e arrondissement. That's a local town hall for the 16th arrondissement, and it's located 50 feet away from where we lived. And she said, Maria said that when my brother heard that, he left. Obviously put on a coat, it was December, and walked, must have obviously intended to go see his father, because he had wanted to be with him. And we waited all day and the next day, and there was no one to turn to. The mairie was closed. There was no one to turn to find out what had happened. The Germans had taken it. It was not like asking the French.
Now, was the mairie was closed because it was Saturday and Sunday, or
No.
because of the German occupation?
No, it was closed that day.
Mm.
It was a Friday, so it would normally be open for business.
Oh, so it was closed for under extraordinary circumstances.
Yes, yes. Access to the mairie was closed. Now, how my brother got in, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
All I know is that a matter of days, maybe a week later, I had already figured, I knew he had not been kidnapped.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that since he had wanted to be with his father, and Maria had come up and said that that's where his father was, and he left immediately after, that, didn't take long to put these facts together and come to the conclusion that he had gone to stay with his dad. And later, as I said, maybe a matter of days, maybe a week later, I got a phone call from an elderly gentleman who had been arrested at the same time as my father, but had been released for ill health. And he told me that my brother was with his father at Compiègne, where there was the detention camp that the Germans were using at the time. Now, evidently, the camp had been in use for some time, but I didn't know anything about it. These are not the sort of things that the newspapers printed or that made the news,
Mm-hmm.
And there was there was no other communication. And then I found out subsequently, but it wasn't until much later, till after the German occupation had ended. And from official, when I pursued inquiries with the French authorities, I found out that my father had been deported to Auschwitz in March of 1942. So a matter of 3 months, maybe 4 months after he had been arrested. And subsequently, and I don't know if it was at that same time or later, Nathan was sent to Drancy. And again, from subsequent research and inquiries with the French authorities, I found that he had been deported in the fall or the winter of that same year, also for Auschwitz. Drancy is where they interned other Jews that had been arrested, this time mostly by French authorities, by French police at, obviously, the behest of the Germans. You ought to arrest all the Jews in a certain neighborhood or all the Jews in a certain category, whatever. And this is where, it was a staging camp for deportation, is what it was. And the day of my father's arrest, I had called Rose. It must have been that same day, as I don't know, but I would assume that I had done it automatically, And because she was the closest to him.
Mm-hmm.
And within days, maybe a week or two, time at that point, telescopes, I don't really know, but it wasn't very long. She came to live with us. And so we continued without my father, without my brother, and went to school until the early summer of 42. June, I think it was. I had a French boyfriend. His name was Bob. Can't think of his last name. As I said to you yesterday, his father was a professor of history at, I think, Henri IV, the lycée Henri IV. And he lived on Boulevard Saint-Germain, by the way, very close to the Odeon. And his parents owned a country house near Pau. And in June, I think, he said it was time to leave Paris.
And this was following what particular?
Obviously, there were more and more arrests. The massive one had not come.
When was the rule about Jews can't travel?
Oh, these were promulgated in the spring of that year.
What about what about the bicycles?
The same thing. We had to turn in our radios. We weren't allowed to have radios. We weren't allowed to travel. We weren't allowed. There was an 8 p.m. curfew. We were not allowed. In fact, we might even have been banned telephone. I can't be sure. And banned the bicycles. And our bicycles were padlocked in the hall, under the stairs in our apartment vestibule, an apartment building vestibule. And I wasn't about to turn my bicycle in, so I couldn't find the lock, so I had a locksmith come.
You couldn't find the key?
The key, I'm sorry. Couldn't find the key, and I had a locksmith come and snap the chain, or break the lock, whatever. And I took the bicycle and put them for safekeeping in a small warehouse. I did not turn it in.
When did the wearing the Star of David?
Also that spring.
And these were, how big were they?
The Star of David was about, from point to point, 4 inches. Point to point, 4 inches, 4 inches, 4 inches, on a vile shade of yellow cloth, outlined in black, with the word Juif in the center, in script imitating, in type imitating Jewish
Hebrew?
script. Yeah, Hebrew script. Juif, it said. Never mind the fact that for a woman it should be Juive, but it was Juif. These had to be collected at the police precinct. We got 2 that had to be hemmed and stitched, not pinned. Because pinned was a cause for immediate arrest, because it indicated that you might wish to take it off and hide it in your pocket. So it had to be stitched on your outer garment in full view, not under a lapel. No, my Tante Rose did wear hers, but she managed to have a scarf, And she could always move the scarf so as either to cover or to uncover the Star of David. And against this, we had to turn in 2 clothing coupons, 2 textile coupons for that.
For that privilege.
Yes. But before that, I forgot the episode of the Prefecture de Police. In January,
Maybe.
When Tante Rose insisted. Now, I was 15 years old, and it's a démarche, it's an enterprise that, if it had to be done, she should have undertaken, not assigned a 15-year-old to do it.
Right.
I was perfectly competent to do it. That wasn't the problem.
Yeah. Well, it didn't reflect well on her.
She insisted that I go to the Prefecture de Police to try to ascertain what had happened to my brother and my father. As I told you, since they were both arrested, since my father was arrested by the Germans and my brother went to join him, and therefore I suppose was in German keeping. I knew he was at that point, I knew he was at Compiègne, which was a German detention camp. Anyway, she insisted that I go. And so I went. I went to the Prefecture de Police. I don't even know what department I asked for. But I was asked what I wanted, and I was ushered into a room and told to wait. And this woman walked in, a policewoman, not in uniform, but, you know, official, employee of the police headquarters, and asked me for my ID card.
A doer woman,
Yes.
unsmiling,
Totally unsmiling.
sort of a Mildred Natwick type,
A little younger.
a little younger, but
Yes, but all business.
all business.
All business. I mean, not my poor child, or
Right.
I can't do anything for you. No. Your identity card.
Mhm.
Well, it had become a fairly recent law, I think, that at the age of 15, every French person, male or female, had to have an official identity card issued by the police department at the local precinct, at the local commissariat police. I turned 15 November 8th. My father was arrested December 12th. There was a period of a month when it should have been taken care of, but for some reason it wasn't.
Was your father practicing sort of a head in the sand?
A little bit, I think, yes. And maybe he knew, and maybe he didn't know, and I think he knew, but, you know, why call attention to ourselves,
Right.
whatever. And so anyway, to make a long story short, I didn't have an ID card. And so I said so to this woman, I don't have one. Well, why don't you have one? I don't have one. You know, it wasn't taken care of immediately as it should have been, but it wasn't. It was no great crime. A month delatoryness is really not a great crime in any country. But anyway, she said, you better get one. And she said, or it will go badly for you the next time you come here without an ID card. And I said, in order to get an ID card, I need a parent's signature. I said, my mother's dead and my father was arrested. How am I going to get their signature? Because it has to be father or mother. Signature du père ou de la mère. And she said, that's not my problem. She said, all I know is that you better have an ID card the next time you come. But as I told you, you know, she reminded me of Lady Bracknell. To lose one parent is a misfortune. To lose two is carelessness,
Mhm.
you know. And at that point, you know, I obviously was careless. And whereupon she dismissed me. She never inquired. She had obviously been told there's a girl here who wants to find out what happened to her father, but she did not bring up the topic with me.
Mm-hmm.
And gave me no explanation, just threw her weight around, exercised her position to the full extent that the law allows, and perhaps beyond. And I made no attempt after that to get an ID card. I just figured that there would not be any occasion for me to go to the prefecture de police. I might go if I was summoned, but I certainly wasn't going to throw myself into the lion's jaw.
Mm-hmm.
But after I got the Star of David, I refused to wear it. Because, as I told you, I saw no reason to be a sitting duck, to be there, you know, fully visible and say, come and get me. You know, I'm here, I'm available. I did not wear it. Besides, it was foisted upon us as a badge of shame, and I did not feel like being shamed. But I did put it on once. I basted it loosely on my garment to go, and that is something I cannot remember why. I had to go to a French government office of some sort. Why, I don't remember. But obviously I felt I had to wear it at that point, you know, because I was summoned as who I was, not as somebody under a false ID.
Mm-hmm.
And wearing the Star of David, I had to ride the last car of the subway. That's, again, another rule. years.
As opposed, you used to...
I used to ride the first class compartment, which was, or the first class car, which was in the center of the train, always red. The other cars were sort of drab, olive green, something like that, but this first class, and I always traveled first class. But there I wasn't able to, because I was wearing the Star of David. And there were some German officers, and enlisted-men went on to take the subway. And not high command, obviously, but you know, an officer on leave in Paris wouldn't have a staff car at his command, so he would circulate there with public transportation. Well, by public transportation. And I remember strutting proudly because there was a German officer there, and I was wearing the Star of David, and I was, you know, I was sort of being defiant. And as I said, I was young and pretty in those days, and nicely dressed, and so, you know, I wasn't going to play the sad sack. Even in spite of what I've been accused of doing since.
Well.
Anyway.
So your attitude was one of defiance, sort of like, screw you, you think I'm not worth...
And exactly. I mean, there was deliberate. I was pacing, because the German officers rode the first class car too. And so I was pacing in front of the first class stop, because there's a sign that says Première classe that hangs down from the vaulted roof of the subway station, and it says Première classe, and you wait there. But even though I knew that I'd have to hightail it to the end of the platform to catch my last car, to board the last car, but I strutted in front of the first class with my Star of David, and I figured that, you know, once that I was wearing it, I was not going to wear it with my head hanging down. And as I wore it in the last car, people looked, but there was no derisive or sneering looks. Rather, you know, I remember the look on one woman's face, like, poor kid, something like that, you know. Although she said she didn't speak to me, but I went home and took the Star of David off, and that was the last time, the one and only time I wore the Star of David.
And Dora never wore it?
No, I never made her wear it.
What was Dora's birthday like the day after your father was arrested?
Oh, well, it was mostly, it went by without much notice. You know. What could you do? You know? And anyway, at the point where Bob said it was time to leave Paris.
Say a little bit more about Bob. Bob was short, tall?
He was medium height, thin, a Frank Sinatra type.
Frank Sinatra type, and he was a student?
He was, at that point, a first-year student at the law school, École de Droit, and École Libre des Sciences Politiques. He was doing a double, what you would call here a double major.
Right.
Sciences Po, political science, and law.
How had you met him?
At the Latin Quarter, probably, you know, in a group of students. You know, you gather together. The gathering place at the Jardin du Luxembourg was under the statue of Mary Stuart. Don't you remember my telling you that?
Yes.
So,
just quickly, your lycée was, now, your family lived on the right bank.
Yes.
And your lycée was
on the right bank.
Oh, it was on the right bank, but it was nothing to take the subway over to the
no,
Latin
absolutely
Quarter.
not, yes.
And your father didn't have any maledictions, any rules that said you can't take the subway by yourself, you can't do this, you can't do that?
Normally I would not have taken the subway as early as I did, but my mother was in a clinic. I had to take the subway by myself. Sometimes I was coming home at 8 and 9 p.m.
From what?
From the clinic. I would go visit her after the lycée.
Now, which clinic was this?
Oh, I don't remember. She was at 2 or 3.
And it was within Paris proper?
Oh, yes, sir. And I'd go visit her and stay with her until 7:30, 8 o'clock, and then take the subway home. I wasn't even 14. You know, I was close to 14. But normally, I did. Yes, I would. I did on occasion if I was late for school, take the subway to school or the bus. And but to travel inside, you know, we didn't go out alone into Paris. You know, to go to and from school, yes, but into Paris, no, we didn't.
Would you go with your girlfriends?
Well, yes, but they all lived. I had a girlfriend who lived Avenue Kléber. Well, Avenue Kléber was just 2 blocks away. We didn't take a subway to go there.
I was just wondering how you said that you met in the Latin Quarter and those.
Oh, yeah, we met in the Latin Quarter. My brother used to attend special classes at the Collège Sainte-Barbe, which is a college that had among its illustrious alums St. Ignatius of Loyola.
Oh, before or after he took orders?
Before. And anyway, so, you know, I'd go to the Latin Quarter.
So, and there was flirting. So you met Bob, and Bob was several years older?
Oh, yes, he was, well, at that point I was 15.
So he was 18?
Yes,
18?
19, I think, probably.
And
we'd go to a movie an afternoon, you know, to a matinee, something like that. Sit at a sidewalk cafe and drink orange juice or whatever, pass for orange juice. And Dora told you that my father used to say that was my chaperone.
Yeah, you don't need to. You don't need to. You don't need to. To muddy your name to clear it. It's
anyway.
I'm sure,
so,
as a father of any pretty daughter, he had a distrust of boys.
Yeah, well,
and,
yes.
You know, and those were conservative times.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, my sister and I were walking up the Boulevard Saint-Michel one Sunday when we met my father and my brother walking down in the opposite direction. We stopped, said hi, and continued.
And he thought nothing of the fact that you two were walking up one way?
No, I mean, he knew that I was out with my sister.
Okay.
Yeah. So...
you would have been how old?
Almost 15.
Almost 15.
Yeah. So...
so it was bonjour, papa.
Yes. Bonjour, papa. Qu'est-ce que tu fais ici? What are you doing here? Obviously, I hadn't planned on meeting him, but anyway, so Bob arranged, he got the train tickets, and Bob arranged that we would go to Tours, which is in the Loire Valley, where he had an aunt. We'd stay there overnight, and then the next day have a passeur guide us across the demarcation line.
And explain who the passeurs were.
Passeurs were like smugglers, only their job was to smuggle people. The demarcation line was a quasi-frontier border.
Right.
And it was within France. And you had to obtain an official permit to cross. Now, for many people, it was just a matter of routine formality. You just applied and got it. But by and large, you had to have a good reason to be given a permit to cross. To see a parent, for instance. You couldn't cross just to go on vacation. At least that's what I seem to remember. That it was not impossible, but also not just, it wasn't distributed like popcorn, you know.
And certain people couldn't go at all.
No. And especially not Jews, because you weren't allowed to travel.
Right.
And the passeur charged you a price to lead you to the demarcation line. My understanding was they crossed it with you, but in some instances they did not. But they'd show you where the demarcation line was, which usually corresponded with the sentry, what would you call that, where the sentries patrolled. The patrol route.
Yeah.
You know. That's where the demarcation line was. I mean, they wouldn't patrol if there wasn't, you know, a border to patrol. So that's where they went. So the passeur, who was local, was supposed to know how regularly the sentries patrol this, how the space of time between each round. And since they were local, they're supposed to know all of that, you know. Well, we know that at this point, the sentry comes by at a quarter past the hour every 3 hours or something like this. Well, we spent the night at Bob's aunt's house. The next day, took a bus, a country bus, what they call a car, which serves, is intercity, not intracity. It's an intercity bus that serves the isolated villages and localities. And we took it to a small village, a country inn. Evening, by then it was evening. And as we entered the inn, the common room, you know, it was like an inn that had a few rooms, but mostly served drinks, you know, cafe or this.
Right.
And to my consternation, I saw the room was full of people waiting for the passeur. And I thought this was the height of insanity, because one isolated stranger showing up in a small village may not attract much attention. But when you amass 20, 30 people, and if a villager happened to walk in and saw all these people, he'd be bound to know that something was going on.
Do you know how had contact originated between, or was it Bob, was it his aunt? Who arranged?
I have no idea. But all you had to do was to go to a village and ask, is there anybody here that... That's how I made contact when I came back with my sister in January 43. I originated the inquiries, got the name of somebody. You could always get the name of somebody, you know. You'd inquire. And I know Bob had made all the arrangements. I had no hand in it, in that I did not know who was the passeur, how he organized. All I know is that when we got there was, as I said, I thought, this is crazy.
And there was no element of games or summer holiday or anything about this. There was no make-believe. You knew this was life and death.
I knew this was for real. Life and death, I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah.
But this was for real. You passed, and if you didn't pass, and if you were caught, off you went.
But at this time, the word of the final solution had not leaked out.
No,
So-
final solution, no, but we knew about the concentration camps.
So and those were places to avoid
At all costs.
at all costs. So
We thought that the purpose was slave labor. And we knew that slave labor meant you worked until you died. That we knew. That I knew.
And now Dora, this was you and Bob and Dora. And was Dora following your direction? Was she obstreperous? Did you have to fight with her?
Absolutely not. She just followed me. Yes. She never gave me never gave me a moment's problem, even when I decided to come back in 43, and everybody thought I was insane.
We'll get to that.
She came. Yeah, there was no, Dora was absolutely not.
So it's you and
Dora
Bob
was a
and...
darling child. What happened? Anyway.
So it's you and Bob and Dora. You're in the great room of this inn.
Yeah, and
with
we're
the fireplace.
waiting. Yes.
People are drinking coffee.
Yes,
and
and mostly, and people are they're waiting. You can tell when there's apprehension, people just sit quietly. They don't talk. And some of these people did have suitcases. Dora and I did not, because I had shipped a trunk, Railway Express.
And how had you been able to do that? There'd been no difficulty?
No, I think I mentioned yesterday when we talked about it. I don't recall any difficulty. And maybe it was Bob who did it for me. I don't recall. But I know I had shipped. I know I had a trunk. And I knew when I shipped it back, I must have done it myself because I shipped it back from Pau when we came back. I shipped it back from Pau to Paris, and my trunk was burglarized, so to speak, and very valuable things were taken from my. I had no recourse, you know.
Right.
There was nothing I could do about it. But anyway, no, I must have sent it myself, but there was no, you know, just shipped it.
Right, and you sent it to the house that was your ultimate destination.
Yes, and that was outside of Pau. So anyway, there we are at the country inn waiting for darkness and a passeur, you know. They came and they said we had to wait till a certain time so that it'd be dark enough and so that it would coincide with the hiatus between rounds by the German patrols.
It's a moonless night. What time of year?
Moonless night. It was June.
June?
Yes.
It'll be a warm night.
Yes. And we trekked on all together. We didn't even leave the inn in small groups. We didn't even leave it furtively. We just left it en masse.
This inn was on the high street of a small town?
It had to be, yes. It was a small town, a village.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. And, but it was night, you know. Although I'm sure, as you pointed out yesterday, there must have been a certain amount of noise associated with the passage of 30 people.
If you figure if it was a cobblestone street, shoes on a cobblestone street make an unmistakable noise.
Anyway, we trekked on and on for what seemed like hours. And finally we were walking for some time into a wood, or got to a wood, where the passeur left us and told us for us to wait there. They would come back. I thought they had left us for good, and I'm sure other people did too. And you can't detain two men against their will when they say, I'm leaving, they leave, you know.
Right.
And besides, we had no clue as to where we were.
Right.
It was dark. Even if we had been familiar with the landscape, we would never have known where we were, having trekked at night like this, you know.
The group you were with, do you think, were they all Jews? Was it some Jews?
I think so, yes. Although there were other French people who passed, some of them who did it regularly, young boys, young fellows would do it for a lark, or to go see somebody, and they knew they wouldn't get an official crossing permit, so they did it for a lark, you know. But that group, I think, was mostly Jews. Some of them, as I said, were carrying suitcases.
How old? Were there some elderly? Were there elderly?
No, I think mostly middle-aged.
Middle-aged.
Yeah. And after what seemed like an eternity, the passeur came back. And they did take us across the demarcation line. They crossed with us. And they took us, and this is where my memory fails me. I don't remember whether we walked directly to Loches, which is a medium-sized town with a very famous castle there, chateau, from which point the group dispersed. They each went their own way. Bob and Dora and I took the train for Pau, from Loches. We obviously had to change somewhere. There was no direct connection. But how we got to Loches, whether we walked all the way to Loches, I tend to doubt it because it can't be that close to Tours. So maybe that maybe we had some form. I can't see any form of transportation, though. This is what puzzles me.
Particularly, not just, did the group split up once you crossed the demarcation, or
no,
you all were going to Loches?
We all were going to Loches because that's where transportation is available for other parts of France.
Right. So I mean, you would have been talking a lot of carriages or a lot of bus or
yes. So we obviously were in Loches, 2 a.m.
Now, if you'd been caught by the Vichy border guards. At
They
this
would
point.
have put us in a detention camp. And the Germans as well.
But would the Vichy have deported you to the Germans?
No.
So
They would
back
have
to-
put me in a local detention camp.
And as we said yesterday, with regard to not first to the students who got arrested on Armistice Day of 40, as well as obviously your father and brother and everything else, there was no habeas corpus. There was no right,
No,
produce evidence of the body.
No,
Yeah.
no, absolutely not. I don't even think it's a concept under French law, But anyway, the very least for a Frenchman would be a few months in jail, or a fine maybe, but I don't know. I think it was more than a fine,
And you said yesterday you weren't certain how much the passeur was paid, but you thought it was about $100.
I would
ahead.
estimate something like that. Yes, I would estimate. I don't. When Bob paid him, but when Dora and I came back, I paid him myself. And I remember thinking it was an outrageous sum for what he did, because this was broad daylight when Dora and I came back. And he led us to, he said, well, I'll tell you later.
Yeah.
When do you want to pass? I said, anytime. He said, now. I said, why not? It was broad daylight. He led us to the edge of a field. He said, you see that path there, 100 feet from there? That's the demarcation line. Run. And for that, I paid him.
Right.
And I paid him handsomely. And so I can't remember. It was per person. Anyway.
So you arrived in Lourdes.
We arrived in Loche and waited at the railroad station. Railroad stations don't close in France, And waited for a train. And we obviously had to make a connection somewhere. And arrived in Pau. And then went to Bob's parents' house, which was at that point empty because they would only come for vacation,
Now, was it empty, or did you say that they were renting to another?
No. That
So
couple
came
came
later.
afterwards. Yes. At that point, it was just Bob and Dora and I. And then his parents followed within a month, because if this was within 2 weeks, probably, because if this was mid to end of June, vacation starts in July, and everybody leaves. Who could leave Paris leaves, So his parents and his sister came. And at the same time, and I don't remember when the Jewish couple joined the group, whether they came together with Bob's parents or arrived later. It was a couple. And in late September, early October, Bob and his family went back to Paris. And Dora and I stayed on.
Now, when did you hear of the rassemblement?
No, Rafle.
Rafle.
Du Veldiv. Veldiv is short for Vélodrome d'Hiver. It's a covered arena where they hold bicycle races. And the day we arrived in Tours, the day we left Paris, the day we arrived in Tours, in fact, no, it was the next day that we heard that the raft had taken place the day Dora and I left.
So literally
Just
12 hours
yes,
perhaps from when you left your door
yes,
to when the police arrived.
yes. And whether they came to our house or didn't, I don't know. I never found out. My aunt was not arrested, so she may not have been home. They call it Rafle du Veldiv because 35,000 women and children were arrested and packed in there for days.
Ruff is lottery?
Pardon me?
Raffle or lottery?
No. Rafle is a, I can't think of the English word.
Selection?
No, it's a sweep.
Ah.
When you sweep an area for criminals, that's a rafle. And it's a random thing. I mean, in other words, you arrest anybody who happens to be
Right.
within. So rafle, the raffle comes from that.
I see.
Same origin, I'm sure. And we heard the next day about that. The day after our arrival in Turin, we found out about this rafle du Veldive.
Well, now, this was publicized.
Oh yes,
This was in the
Yeah.
papers. And how did they justify it?
didn't have to.
They just said that the Metropolitan Police and have arrested Jewish Jews.
Yes, were detained. Were detained. Jewish. 35,000 Jews were detained by the French police, and that's all they needed to say. They didn't need to justify it.
Had the government been doing any sort of campaign to prepare the people for the coming pogrom? I mean, have they been
No.
a la the Nazis talking about the dirty Jews, the Jews, the...
Oh, that was constant, but that was not the government. That was all the anti-Semites in the press. There was a newspaper called Je suis partout, I'm everywhere. That was one of their most scurrilous writers was a guy named Jean-Hérol de Paquis. And every day he'd spew out filth and venom against the Jews. Every day. Every day. The name of the newspaper is I'm Everywhere, meaning the Jews.
Oh.
You see. And he was something like Gauloise, vile.
What happened to him after the war? Justice.
Yes. But
So now you're in Po, and
it's the end of the summer.
end of the summer. Bob and his parents. Now Bob's parents had taken a great risk.
Not in the occupied zone, no. I mean, not in the free zone.
Not in the free zone.
No.
But to the extent that they had helped you and no.
No, because there was no way to tie them to us. I had gone with Bob, not with them. We didn't travel together.
Yeah.
And there was no law that made it a crime to shelter a Jew. That the police might find a way to detain you for some reason or other, but there was at that time that I know of no law that said it was a crime to shelter a Jew.
Okay.
And but we so they weren't taking any great risk.
But it was an act of compassion.
Oh, well, absolutely, definitely, they didn't have to do it. You know, I wasn't married to them. You know, so.
So. Okay, it's
September. By September, or September or October, definitely early October, they've gone back to Paris. And Dora and I moved into town to a hotel. Because it was, cold weather was setting in. We had no transportation other than our bicycle. Between Pau and the country house, which was located perhaps 10 kilometers, several miles.
What's the terrain like there? Mountainous?
Well, it's rather flat there. It is in the mountain, but it's like Denver. It's a plateau. The plateau. I mean, if you sit on the Promenade des Pyrénées in Pau, you see the chain of the Pyrenees in front of you. But at that particular spot, you may have a certain elevation above sea level. Yes, but it's not terribly hilly. And I'd ride my bike into Pau in the good weather. But as I said, by November, by October, end of October, it's cold. I mean, the altitude.
Right.
In the Pyrenees, they ski.
Right.
So there was no reason for us to be in that. It was not a big country house, but nonetheless, it was bigger than my sister and I needed for just ourselves. And we moved into a hotel. And Pau was a town of about, at that time, 40,000 people.
About 30 miles from the Spanish border?
As the crow flies, 15 maybe, but the border being up in the mountains, it runs through the mountains. So it's close to the Spanish border. But closer yet to the Spanish border was a small town called Aubonne, good waters, which small, well, I should really say village, was totally given over to the detention of Jews who had been caught trying to sneak across the Spanish border to safety, which was not always safety because the Spaniards, well, they didn't turn most people back. They did put them in internment camps. Better there than in internment camps anywhere else, but anyway, the village of Aubonne had the entire population virtually had moved out, and the village was the detention center for these Jews who lived in individual houses and apartments, whatever, and were allowed freedom within the enclave of the village. They could not go beyond the border, but beyond the village limits. They were guarded by gendarmes.
Vichy.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
but I could go in and out. I was not a detainee.
The Vichy extended up to the Spanish border?
The entire area of France known as Zone Libre was under Vichy.
Right, okay, but Zone Libre extended up to the Spanish
yes,
border.
It included part of the Mediterranean ports.
But none of the Atlantic coast, none of the Bay of
the
Biscay.
entire Atlantic coast from Hendaye or Irun. There's Irun on one side of the border, Hendaye on the other. From Hendaye to Calais, the entire coast was under German jurisdiction.
And it was forbidden for French civilians to be there.
The immediate coastal area, yes. And only the riverain people who lived there worked there. But you couldn't get a permit to go there. And so, close to my birthday, the day before, or 2 days before, I went down to visit a family I knew who had landed in Aubonne. How I knew them, I probably obviously had known them before they made the attempt to cross.
Did you stay in touch? The people who made the crossing from Tours, you all separated and you never saw each other?
Yes.
Yeah, so could it have been people that you knew from
Paris?
Paris?
No, it was somebody I knew from Pau, obviously. Yes, who had tried to make it across and had not. Right. And I got a letter, and so I decided to go visit them. So I left Dora at the hotel overnight to go visit them. And while it's close, with a car I could have made the trip back and forth, a return trip in half a day. But without a car, you have to wait for the local train. You have to, they don't run every hour, once a day. So I had gone up there, stayed with that family overnight, and then I was coming back the next day. And I'm on the train looking out the window, and I know there's one of those high-flying bridges that you see arcing over deep chasms, deep valleys. It was a railroad bridge. And I saw a German sentry. And for a moment, you think, oh, a German sentry. And then the next thought is, what's a German sentry doing here? I mean, this is not the occupied zone. They're not supposed to be German sentries. Well, when I got to Pau then, an hour or two later, I discovered the reason why. The day before, it must have been the day before because there would not have been, the German response was quick, but it wouldn't have been, that quick.
Right.
The day before, the Germans, the Allies had landed in North Africa on my birthday, November 8th, 1942. And that was the only good birthday I had during the entire occupation. That was the reason for the presence of the German sentry, because upon the landing of the Allied forces in North Africa, landing which had met only token resistance on the part of the French authorities, because the French authorities were in full command and possession of the North African, what had been colonial territories. Colonial and protectorate. Morocco was a protectorate. Algeria was a quasi-province of France. It was a colony. And there was Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria. Anyway, Admiral Darlan, who was an admiral, and he had been an official in the Vichy government, had been sent to North Africa, possibly as governor. Anyway, he turned Copte, and he joined the Allied effort, and he was assassinated.
How soon thereafter?
I can't remember. Not too long thereafter.
But was it ever established by whom? The Germans, the French?
Probably by somebody who didn't approve of his casting his lot with, perhaps by the milice, perhaps, I don't know. I know there is knowledge, more or less certain. I just can't tell you at this time. I've known it, but, can't keep every fact on file in my mind. But I do recall that he was assassinated. And anyway, the French, distrusting the next move, I mean not the French, the Germans, distrusted the next move because the Allies were not very far away at that point, North Africa, across the Mediterranean, with Gibraltar as a bridge, because the Allies would not have benefited from any cooperation on the part of Franco for crossing from Spain. But nonetheless, the war was getting a little closer from the western sector, it was getting a little closer at that point. And that's when they sent their troops across the demarcation line to occupy militarily outposts in what had been Free France.
So this was November 1942, so 2.5 years since Dunkirk.
Yes.
So 2.5 dark years.
Yes.
This was this was really the first significant ray of any sort of light.
Absolutely.
Until then, the tunnel, it appeared not to be a tunnel, but a hole.
Yes. But it's a funny thing. Somebody asked me, I don't know if it was you, somebody asked me, had I ever had any doubt as to the outcome of the war? Never. Never. I never doubted that we would be liberated.
Now, was that just a 14-year-old
it was an
naivete?
No, not naivete. An invincible faith in the rightness of... No, it wasn't naive. It wasn't naive. I knew the Germans were, they're not invincible. De Gaulle, I didn't know that he had said it, but it was obvious to know. We'd lost a battle, but the Germans are not totally invincible. But it was a faith. It was a blind faith. It was not naivete.
Okay.
It was faith that I never had any doubt that they would end up going down in defeat.
And so, but this was the first proof of the right.
It was the first ray of sunshine. It was the first opening. Yes.
Because even though the war in Russia had started to go badly for the Germans, it wasn't until 1943.
Well, we didn't know anything about that. They did not advertise their defeats.
Their defeats, right. So okay, so you've taken the train back to Po. It's November 9th. You hear about Operation Torch and Eisenhower landing in North Africa, and what? What
happens next? Well, as I told you, Po had been a very fashionable resort before World War II. It was equipped with all sorts of recreational facilities. It was a resort for Englishmen particularly favored Po. And there were vast number... Pardon me?
Lots of golf courses, casinos.
Yes. Casino, maybe not, but recreational for summer, affluent summer vacation or spring vacation, whatever. And there were a large number of Jewish refugees there.
Town of 30,000, you said?
Yes, 30. I looked it up one time, and it seemed to me that's what it said. That was the birthplace of King Henry IV. It was not an insignificant, historically it was not insignificant. And of course there are plenty of wealthy Jews there, because you're not a refugee unless you have money. Otherwise you stay put. What can you do? And whiling away the afternoons, as I did, talking to them, sitting at a sidewalk cafe, having a ersatz coffee.
Were you and Dora ever adopted or taken under the wing of any family? Would you have welcomed it?
No, absolutely not.
You would have resented it?
I was myself. No, nobody else did. I was perfectly capable of handling my own affairs.
Was there a feeling of was the ambience one of desperation?
No.
Was it the rhinoceros?
Attentisme. No, it was attentisme. It was waited out.
Waited out.
Attentisme. Attentisme is not defeatism. It's attentisme. You wait it out.
But they felt they were safe there.
Obviously.
Okay.
Because when I made my decision to return to Paris,
which was?
This is why I made it. Within a few weeks, by then I had obtained an ID card in Pau. It had to have been Pau because I didn't get it in Paris. And that was the only way to square myself with the authorities. And obviously, to square myself in terms of having obeyed the French rule that at 15 you have an ID card. Mm-hmm. And obviously they weren't so strict about having a parent sign for it. Mm-hmm. So I had an ID card.
And now was this the Corsican?
No.
No, okay, that comes later.
No, this was legal.
So this is legal. Okay.
And within weeks of the landing in North Africa and of the Germans entering occupied France, the racial edicts of northern France were decreed for. The edicts of occupied France became law in the free quote zone libre, free territory. We had to report not to the police station, to the town hall, to register as Jews. And since there was no sense in not doing it, because my sister and I were known. We were, like we were the two orphan girls,
Were there any other children with that?
No. And I was 16, but I looked older. Well, I didn't look 20, but,
Is this when you started smoking?
I didn't smoke regularly. Cigarettes were strictly rationed, and it was only obtainable, if you were a man, you had to wait, you had to make long queues. This is another aspect of life under the German occupation. I refuse to wait in line for a movie or a restaurant. I will not wait in line, and one reason is that we spent so much of our lives waiting in line in France during the German occupation. If you wanted to buy anything, you had to wait in line, When the butcher was open, the first day of the 3 days that the butcher was open, you got there at 6 o'clock in the morning and you waited in line, because even though you had meat coupons, you weren't sure he had enough supply to last the entire day. So people went and waited in line. You just, lines. I don't know if you saw Moscow on the Hudson, where people, Robert Williams goes home in the evening, he sees a line and he automatically joins it, and then he says, by the way, what are we waiting for? Oh, toilet paper, okay, But people, there was a line forming, people would automatically join it. The Brits had the same thing, they call it queue.
Right.
In France it was called faire la queue. And queue, as in English. And
so you're in Pau. We get that same decree. We have to register at the post office. Why did I make the digression about waiting in line? Cigarettes. I asked you if you
Yeah,
smoked.
yes, yes. I don't think I smoked till 43. And, no, in fact, I'm sure I didn't. So when they decreed this, there was no way for me to avoid going without being sure that a gendarme would be at my door the next day, wanting to know why I hadn't registered, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I registered. I went to the town hall and waited in line with all the other Jews. And there was a long table with fonctionnaires, bureaucrats seated, employees seated, and registering us. And as I stood in line, this one pipsqueak seated and doing the registration turned to his colleague seated next to him, and he said, "I didn't know there were so many of them. Je ne savais pas qu'il y en avait tant."
Mm-hmm.
When I handed in my identity card, it was stamped in letters that big, red, Jew, Juif. When I saw that and I heard that remark, I thought to myself, it's time to go.
Oh, when you say you handed him your card and he stamped it.
Yes, it was stamped there, right then and there, as it would have been in Paris had I had one, and reported when I was supposed to report.
Right.
And he stamped it Juif. And everybody had their ID card stamped Juif because that's what the purpose of your being there. And I don't think they imposed the wearing of the Star of David at that point. In fact, I'm pretty sure I didn't. I'm pretty sure they didn't because had they had, I would have been in a quandary. What do I do? I'm known as a Jew and I don't wear it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure they didn't. But it was, you know, I could see the thing unrolling from then on, or unreeling, you know, from the registration. Then next would come the curfew. Next would come the radios, the bicycle, the ban on travel. So that's mid-November to late November. And I started mulling things over, and I finally told people I knew, Jewish people, that I was going back to Paris with Dora. And they said, "You are crazy." And I said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Here, everybody knows us.
Mm-hmm.
You're known, I'm known.
Mm-hmm.
In Paris, you move into a strange neighborhood, and unless you look very Jewish, people don't know."
Now, did you know whether your apartment was still safe, or?
No, I didn't. No.
But it didn't matter.
No.
You weren't necessarily even planning on going back there.
I hadn't even any doubt that it was still available. I had left, my aunt had stayed, and I figured we can't stay. We're not staying. We're going.
Right. You never tried to communicate with anybody in Paris?
No.
No postcard?
No. Postcards were, the postcards was the weather is bad or the weather is good.
Mm-hmm.
That was, those were codes. Everybody knew the code. The weather is bad, don't come. The weather is good, come on in. The water's fine. Yeah.
Right.
And so at that point, some people I knew became rather alarmed by my decision, and they contacted a Jewish welfare agency that had obviously been set up to help Jews who were running out of cash, out of funds. And this representative came to see me at my hotel and said that he was alarmed at my decision and could he talk me out of it, and I said no. And I got rather angry at one point and, told him in no uncertain terms that I was master of my destiny. I was going to go. And I remember he said, "You should be in the theater." Very dramatic, You should be in the theater. You remind me of so-and-so in such and such a film. Anyway, I told him that I was going. And I set inquiries afoot. And the upshot was that early January, I shipped my trunk back to Paris.
To which address?
Avenue Henri Martin, my home.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no other address. I could have sent it to Bob's, but I never even thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, had no communication from either Bob or his parents. And
had they known that you had gone from, you'd left the home?
Yes.
And were in a hotel?
Yes. And so one afternoon we boarded a bus in Pau, Dora and I. And this, I'm flying by the seat of my pants at this point.
Mm-hmm.
All I know in advance is that I'm going to a certain village to contact a passeur.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mid-afternoon. We get on this inter-village bus, intercity bus, a car, with the name of the passeur and the village where he lives.
Do you remember how you got this name? You just...
No, you just set inquiries afoot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you ask, you know a passeur, do you know where I can pass, you know,
right.
how do I contact him, what village? After that it's up to me to,
Yeah.
find out what bus,
Sure.
car goes there, and the name of the passeur and how to find him in the town, in the village. Dora and I boarded the bus. As I said, Dora followed me blindly. We got off at a small village, and as we got off the bus, there was a gendarme there, watching everybody coming off that bus. Now, obviously, we didn't look like local yokels.
Mm-hmm.
But he said nothing. He didn't ask for ID card. I had my ID card inside my shoe.
Mm-hmm.
In a pinch.
Right.
Better to be nabbed for traveling without a permit than be nabbed without ID papers eventually.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one is more punishable than the other, I think. But in any event, I had that in the sole of my shoe.
What would you have needed the permit for? The permit to cross the border? Or the permit to travel within the free zone?
I didn't need a permit to travel within the free zone because we weren't allowed to travel.
Oh, right. Right.
Yeah. We weren't allowed to travel. You can't need a permit when
Yeah.
you're not allowed to do something.
Now, the free zone, did it still exist anymore after...
Oh, yes. This still was the figment of the free zone maintained to the end of the occupation.
To the end of the occupation
Absolutely.
or till after D-Day? Did it...
No, to the end of the occupation, because, what do you mean, D-Day was June 6th. The Germans didn't depart Paris till August.
Right, but I was just wondering if they occupied the rest of France.
Yes, they did.
But there still was a fiction of a Vichy government.
Oh, yeah, but the Vichy government was still very much, in fact, when they left, yes, it was still very much, it was not more, it wasn't just a fiction, it was a fact of, day-to-day administration. But when the Germans left France for good, they took Marshal Pétain with them, a quasi-prisoner. They took him to Spreiregen, a German fortress. And they didn't leave him behind. He was, Pétain's adherents claimed that he was a hostage. He obviously didn't go willingly.
Mm-hmm.
But in any event, at that point, there's still, the German troops have invaded the south of France, are occupying key positions. They are in towns, but the day-to-day administration is done by the French.
Okay.
There's still a French police, there's still a token French army, there's a French government, it's still, And I don't need a permit to travel because I can't get one. I don't need a permit to cross the demarcation line because I wouldn't get one.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we therefore got off that car
Under the supervision.
under the supervision of that gendarme who was watching everybody coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't notice anybody who seemed out of place but Dora and me.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, he didn't ask anything. We were young enough. He obviously didn't think we were anybody on the lam,
Right.
Dora was carrying a very small suitcase, and so was I. and got off the bus, walked to the center of town, and made inquiries as to find Monsieur Michel or Monsieur Jacques or whatever his name was. And I was given direction to his farm, and we walked there. And I told him that, I had been given his name by such and such. And he said, do you want to cross? I come to cross the line, demarcation line. And he said, when do you want to cross? I said, anytime. He said, you want to cross now? I said, why not? So it's broad daylight. And since it was January, it had to be still relatively early, although these are southern parts where the sun sets later. And Dax, that area was maybe within 50 kilometers of Pau. Probably was about 4:30 p.m., something like this. And so he said, are you going to cross now? I said, sure. So he led us to the edge of a field, as I told you earlier. He pointed to a path there. He said, you see that path there? I said, yes. He said, that's a demarcation line. Filet. Make a dash for it.
Describe the day. This was January, and you're in the center of France?
No, southern France.
Oh, southern France. Cold, warm?
Warmish.
Warmish.
It's not a cold January.
Do you remember how you were dressed? Were you dressed like proper young ladies, or you
yes.
dressed
Oh yes. There was no such thing as the déshabillé that you see today.
So skirts and
oh yes,
stockings, hose,
yes.
shoes,
Oh yes,
coats. And when you came up to this guy's farm, first of all, when you went, I mean, it must have been just the most open conspiracy in these towns when people would come up and say, I mean, everybody knew. They probably figured, Mr. Jacques has got a couple more.
Oh, obviously.
And so,
particularly in a small French town, when everybody knows everybody's business.
And so you come up to his farm. Do you recall anything about how he looked?
Just a peasant, a man in his 30s.
30s?
Yeah, gave him the money. He said, filet, run. Make a dash for it, and we did.
Was he the stereotypical Frenchman with the beret and the Gauloise?
No, I don't know. Gauloise bleu, dangling from... No, not the Gauloise bleu. Beret, no, I don't think so. He was dressed for field work, I think. And anyway...
Okay, so you're at the line, and he says,
run, make
hustle.
a run, hustle. And obviously I had to find out from him, what did I do once I had crossed the line?
Yeah.
How did I get to the nearest town for a train? And as we're crossing the line, Dora's suitcase opens up and spills its contents on the path.
In broad daylight?
In broad daylight, with German patrol due, I don't know, maybe not any minute, but certainly, Anyway, that's not the place where you want your suitcase to open. So we just grabbed everything.
Does she get flustered? Do you get flustered?
Somewhat, I think. I may even have raised my voice. I don't recall. But
not you, never.
No, never.
And the word merde did not go ringing.
No, that's a word I never used.
Never.
Never.
Huh?
I've only started using it here because I don't like shit.
Yeah.
Anyway, we piled the stuff back in her little suitcase, and I remember she had fur slippers, rabbit slippers, and we couldn't get one back in, so I shoved it in my pocket, in my coat pocket. And we proceeded to the next, obviously, on the other side of the demarcation line, not too far away, maybe an hour's march, was a small town with a railroad station. And we went to the railroad station and inquired the next train for Dax. Now Dax is a town larger than Pau, I think, in southern France, closer to the coast.
Spell it.
D-A-X. You haven't found your map of France?
No, when we go out, I'm going to go to the
Yeah.
bookstore and buy one.
Okay. Dax had a direct train to Paris, a midnight train. At that point, we're in the occupied zone. So I don't have to worry about crossing any more demarcation line. Another problem, and probably more ominous, was presenting itself. But at that point, as I said, I'm flying by the seat of my pants. All I know.
What was this other problem?
Well, I'll tell you about
Okay.
it. As we get to the railroad station, you know, I have a feeling that the railroad station must have been within the same locality where the farm of that passeur was, only that he was on one outskirt, that we walked across the demarcation line, walked along fields, and ended up at the railroad station that serves this entire area. I don't really, I don't remember the name of that small station, but a station it was.
Right.
And just then, waiting in the railroad station, I noticed a man who'd been on the bus when we left Pau. And suddenly, he is like us on the other side of the line.
And you don't know whether he crossed legitimately or not?
Oh, obviously he didn't, because there's no crossing point there.
Oh, okay.
There were only crossing points in certain localities.
Well-dressed man?
Traveling salesman type.
Traveling salesman?
Yeah, mid to late 30s. And he said, I had noticed him. I had seen him on the, not noticed, I had seen him on the bus. And then we find ourselves on the other side of the border, and he's there too. So I knew he had obviously. And he looked at us, and he looked at me, and we had gone, there's a buvette in the station. A buvette is a refreshment stand, you know, you go have tea, coffee, or a drink. And we'd gone there, and he looked, and he said, he approached me, and he said, you've just crossed the line, haven't you? You know, I felt pretty sure he was not a cop. And I looked at him. I said, yes. And he said, how much did you pay? And I told him, and he said, you should have come with me across for nothing. Well, I said, you know, I had no way of knowing.
Right.
And he said, where are you going? I told him, we're going to Paris. And we're waiting for the train to Dax, from the small town to Dax, and from Dax to Paris. And he said, you have an ID card? You have identity papers? And I said, yeah, I do. It's in my shoe. You know. Why? And I told him. You know.
You told him you were Jews?
Yeah. And he said, you'll never make it to Paris. I said, why not? And he said, every night on these trains, they have German and French patrols patrolling these trains, identity checks. And that was in early 43. By then, the resistance was more potent, in particular in southern France. There were Allied prisoners of war, not prisoners of war, airmen whose planes had been downed. They were ferried across France to the Spanish border. They were, you know.
So that's why even train, because I was going to ask you, why would a train going north, why would they be looking for escaping Jews? But what you're saying is...
They're not looking for escaping Jews.
They're looking for anybody.
For resistance.
Okay, for resistance.
They're looking, yes, because a train going north is obviously not going to take Jews up north.
Right.
It's looking for resistance, members of the resistance, back from a ferrying job or out on a mission. Known people who've been denounced by neighbors or who've been traced for months, etc. They are looking for any member of the resistance. They're looking for any escaped Allied prisoner of war. They're looking for any downed pilot. And these, and as a matter of fact, when he told me that, it rang a bell. I knew that that was taking place. That these, and he said, you will never make it to Paris without an identity control. And he said, I'll tell you what. I had bought the train was leaving at midnight. And I had first class ticket. and he said, I'll tell you what, I'll see where you're sitting, and if I see a German patrol coming on board, or French, I'll let you know we'll manage to hide you somehow. You know, go to the toilet. You know, as if they wouldn't look in the toilet, but anyway. And he was absolutely certain that there would be a control. There was all the time. Anyway, we boarded the train at midnight and arrived in Paris the next morning without ever an identity check.
So your guardian angel came through again.
And we took the subway and we landed back at our apartment. Rose was still there. Maria was still there.
Now this is, you left in September, you left, when did you left in June, and you returned in January. And in all this time your aunt, cousin had not known where you were?
All she knew was we were in Pau. She knew I had told her where we were.
And when you returned, was she relieved? Was she irritated?
No, she was not. She was neither. She was neither relieved nor irritated. She said, "Oh, there you are." And that was that.
Well, hardly in loco parentis. I think your father would not have been pleased with...
Oh, no, she was a figurehead, you know. And, no, she was not. Why would she have been irritated?
Well, I mean, they're the two extremes of reaction. One would be, oh my God, I'm so worried about you. And the other was, oh my God, you're here again. The more that are here, the more difficult it'll be for me.
Well, actually, that was my place, not hers.
Right, but that doesn't mean she wouldn't feel it.
No, she never did.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
It wasn't until later that we had bitter words, and it was mostly over her lack of contribution to household expenses.
Now that raises an interesting question, which is, I mean, I've done some small amount of traveling in this world, and I know that if you lose your money, you're in deep yogurt, and you didn't have the luxury of American Express traveler's checks. So how did you keep your money? How did you keep from getting your money stolen? And
oh, yeah, that was not a problem in those days.
No.
Not even during wartime. It was a different world.
Even during wartime.
No, that was not. Truly, it was not a problem.
And there was no. You didn't fear for your personal safety in terms of being attacked, raped, or anything.
Honey, if I missed the last subway, left the head of the line at 11:30. There was a midnight curfew, and if I missed the last subway going home, if I was out with Bob to go to a movie, I'd walk home.
Okay. Well, I know it was safer, but still.
No, it was not an issue. It really was not. I never worried about having my purse stolen or my money stolen. No. No.
So you're in Paris.
You've returned to Paris since January of '43.
And why don't we take a break here and go run our errands and get more film and get the trivet.
Exactly.
Okay. So we will resume in Paris. Okay, so we have resumed. Let me turn down the volume here.
Yes.
We have resumed, and you have returned to Paris
in January
43. January 43. Now, you mentioned that on the train trip, something had decisively changed in the climate in France, both occupied France and free France, which was there was now a resistance.
There was no resistance, and there was a genuine manhunt going on all the time. When I got back to Paris, the first thing that my aunt told me was, when you go down in the subway, before you go down in the subway, you circle the block to make sure there is no black police cars around. They have those like minibuses that they use for when they expect to arrest more than one person.
I see.
And they park those in a side street and then spread for the subway and do ID checks. And so the climate by then had definitely changed. There was more suspicion. There was, on the part of the authorities, both German and French, more repressive measures in the sense of identity checks without any pretext whatsoever. They decide to. I remember walking on Place Clichy one time, and they were circling the sidewalk cafe. I mean, circling the terrace of the cafe. You know, we call Café Terrasse.
Right.
Where the tables are set out on that broad expanse of concrete in front, and there were German soldiers every 2 or 3 feet.
And they were sort of doing a sweep? They were
doing a sweep of that cafe. Obviously somebody had tipped them that some member of the resistance was going to meet somebody else there, or that's where he used to meet, or that's where they would have make arrangements for drops or whatever, you know. So these were taking place more and more frequently. And I was caught in one once. And, and that again was before I had my false identity card and my fake identity card. And
when was that?
when I had my fake identity.
No, when was it that you were caught in one of these sweeps?
It was warm weather. It was warm weather, and it was in 43. So
sometime between
spring
March.
Late spring, early summer.
How else had the atmosphere in Paris changed?
Actually, that was even before I left the apartment, so that was late spring.
How else had the atmosphere in Paris? First of all, what do you remember of that winter? The winter when you returned to Paris. Again, was it a mild winter, a harsh winter? Was it...
No, I don't remember anything about that particular winter. The winter after, the winter of 43, 44, I had no coat because I had left them. I had walked out with what I had on my back, and that was late spring when I walked out. And I spent the entire winter without a coat. And
you made do with sweaters?
No, newspaper under my jacket.
Oh. It's okay. So it's January '43. You and Dora go back. Are you still sharing a room? Or now there's an empty room in the
No,
apartment?
I don't think we're sharing a room.
Did you
no.
take Nathan's room? And
I think she did, probably.
She did?
I can't remember.
And Rose was living in your father's room?
Yes, yes.
Did that bother you?
No.
No?
No, there were 3 bedrooms.
Sure, I did.
3 people. You know.
You had given up hope that you'd ever see your father again?
No, I wouldn't say that I had given up hope, but I didn't entertain much hope either.
So you figured if he was alive, he was in one of these work to camps?
Yes.
How about you described how in 41 and 42 the atmosphere of Paris was essentially this one of studious oblivion, oblivious studiousness, attempt to just pretend it didn't exist and wait for it to be over.
Well, there was definitely a sense of heightened danger in 43, but no more overt animosity on the part of the general populace because they were under occupation. And
were there more frequent assassinations, more frequent reprisals?
No, by then this had stopped actually.
The assassinations or the reprisals?
Yes, both. There were reprisals. They were usually the action was then against the Maquis. The action had shifted. It was no longer lone assassination in an isolated street in the dead of night. It was then the action had shifted to the Maquis, where they had organized bands that would ambush a German patrol, and then there were reprisals, but there were no longer reprisals that were posted on billboards in Paris giving names. This would be, for instance, entire villages. Now,
the Maquis were primarily a rural
Maquis is a term borrowed from Corsica, where these semi-outlaws, when they had indulged in a hereditary vendetta, killed someone who had snubbed them or snubbed a member of their family or done something worse, would retaliate by assassinating them or a member of their family, etc. Then they would take to the maquis. And maquis means underbrush, undergrowth. And so when this movement started, where the resistance movement was advanced to such a state that they couldn't just work from their home. They had to leave their home and live as a unit, so to speak, small units, small bands. Then they would live out in the woods. And that was known as le maquis, underbrush.
Right.
And so that the resistance movement became known as le maquis.
And what you said that they focused on attacking German patrols.
Yes, German patrols, German sabotaging rail lines. I remember this. The first I heard of massive deportation was from that man who shepherded us on that train ride from Dax.
Now, did you ever learn any more about him or his condition, why he was moving?
No, he was a Frenchman. He just had to go up north, and he didn't bother. He knew how to cross by himself, and he had obviously the proper credentials.
But he crossed the border. He crossed the border illegally.
Yes. Yeah, but he knew how to do it. He knew what to do it himself, and so he did it. No, I never, never knew his name. Didn't get any information from him.
And I'm not sure if I asked you for his description before. Again, just.
And I told you it was his early 40s, late 30s, early 40s.
Well dressed, peasant dressed.
No, not fancy dress. Just.
Could have been a traveling salesman.
It could have been. Could have been.
And what did he tell you about the deportations?
He is the one who told me about the trains of deportees that the French cheminots are the railroad workers, the yard workers, the switchers, the rail layers, and they would occasionally derail a train, and this man is the one who told me about trains taking people to deportation, and how the trains were locked and people crying for water, and the train was sealed.
And did you assumed that this is what had happened to your father?
No, I did not assume that.
Did you assume that this was the fate of Jews, or was this this could have been workers being deported?
Not workers. Generally, workers would not be deported. Workers would be taken.
Yeah.
No. This would have been members of the Maquis resistance if they were taken by the Germans, if they were taken by the French. The French got to the point where they turned them over to the Germans, and the Germans would deport them to Bergen-Belsen or Dachau, or never to Auschwitz. That was strictly for the Jews. And
so in 43, let's see, what's the war doing in 43? In 43, you had the landing in Sicily in 43. Anzio was later in 43. Sicily was relatively early in 43 because they did Sicily, and then they used Sicily as a launching pad to go into Naples at Anzio. And so, do you recall the invasion of Sicily?
No, I recall the huge billboards, posters that the Germans posted, plastered all over Paris, that showed the Italian boot and a snail crawling. And it showed that at the rate of travel of a snail, the snail would have reached Rome faster than the Allied armies had at this point. Because as you know, their progress up the Italian peninsula was very slow and painful. And so the Germans used that as a propaganda weapon.
Now, why would they care at what point do you think the Germans transitioned from trying to recruit the French as allies to trying to destroy any nascent hope of liberation? At what point did basically the Germans give up on co-opting the French?
I think it was in 43. I mean, when the Allies were working their way in Italy, they had liberated North Africa.
Rommel was defeated in 42, late 42, I believe.
And
oh no, it would have been 43 because 42 was the landings. There was the Battle of Kasserine Pass, which is where Patton starts the movie, and that was in early 43. But from that point on, well, actually, Rommel was defeated. When was Tobruk? Tobruk could have been late 42. 43,
I don't think so.
43 was the watershed battles of 43 were Stalingrad and Midway. Now, did you hear of Stalingrad?
No.
No, so
I didn't.
No.
Maybe there were some who knew. I didn't.
But so there was.
Although I recall since then seeing a facsimile or an original newspaper of the period, which I did not see at the period, or if I did,
you don't have a memory.
I don't have a remembrance of it. And the facsimile said something about German forces battling in front of Stalingrad. But that's something I saw in 1994 when I visited that exhibit. And it's possible that I saw it at the time and had too many other preoccupations to notice much, because at that point I was pretty much trying to keep body and soul together. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you're back in the apartment. It's January of 43. Rose is there, not really contributing, more or less sponging?
Yes.
Sponging off of what resources your father had left you, and Dora. Dora's there. Have you resumed school?
No, she does.
Dora does.
Yes.
Dora resumed school, and what are you doing with your time?
Just what a Parisienne does.
You went to the Louvre.
I went to the Louvre.
You went to the parks.
Yes,
You
and
went to the Bois de Boulogne.
Yes, yeah, but I did not. At that point, school was
Yeah. You
moved
had,
on.
right. You had more serious
Yes,
stuff.
yes.
Do you recall anything? Did you? What about you and Bob?
We broke up, and there's something I'm trying to reestablish in my mind is the chronology of when we broke up, because I started taking things out of the apartment at one point. Now,
Objet d'art?
yes, things, paintings, anything that could be removed without the help of a mover, something that I could put in a suitcase, something that could be carried.
For what purpose?
For saving it.
For saving it? No, not for sale.
No.
Oh, so you were removing.
I was removing items, a little at a time. And I'm trying to think, when I started doing that, I was trying to remember whether it was before I went to Pau or after. I think it was after. And I started, as I said, I started removing whatever bed linens I could, sheets, blankets that could fit in a suitcase.
And where did you take these?
I took them to a little warehouse, and then I took some to Bob's parents' apartment. I got some of my father's clothes out, suits, coats.
Your father didn't wear off the rack?
No, it was all tailor-made. And in fact, there's a tailor across from the opera house where he had some of his suits made.
Taylor's still there?
Yep. And a lot of it went to Bob's parents' house. A lot.
The house in the country or the apartment?
Apartment. Apartment in Paris. I took out crystal candelabras, all my father's Lalique collection, and Lalique pieces that I see at Marshall Field for $5,000. And paintings, I told you, I put those in a small warehouse, or in a small storage area, where I had the bikes, actually. I say warehouse, it's really more of a storage, big storage area.
Which part of Paris was it in?
It was in the 16e.
Oh, okay, so it was very, it was
Yeah.
good.
Yes, but most of the personal things that I took out, I took to Bob's parents' place.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, there were anything that could be put in a large suitcase that I could carry.
Mm-hmm.
And it had, or rather, as I said, linens, table linens, bed linens, those were valuable because you could replace them, you know. And household linens are always a valuable thing. And as I said, my father's clothes, various items, and I was taking them out progressively. And we had to do it, sub rosa, because it was, we were not allowed to take anything out of the apartment. And the concierge was very hostile.
Was this the same concierge as before? Monsieur, I am the citizen.
No,
of the...
no, that's not that one. No, this one, Monsieur Pompey, was later, after the occupation, when I moved to another apartment.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
No, this was Fat Harridan, and she was very hostile.
Now, do you think she was hostile to you because the building owners, you said, yes, they were Jew?
Yeah.
Do you think she was hostile to you as a proxy for the building owners? There was a resentment against that? Was
No.
it general anti-Semitism?
No, I guess because we were sassy kids, I guess. You know, I don't really know.
She'd been the concierge before the war?
And I think she was simply looking out for herself.
Mm-hmm.
It was her job to see to it that we did not take anything out.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, she was looking out for herself, and to a degree you can understand that. So what we would do is I would send Dora downstairs for a lookout.
Mm-hmm.
And if the loge was closed, if the door was closed, because they had French doors, double doors, with curtain. And if the concierge was there on duty, the door was open. But if she was out running errands or doing some work in the building, like sweeping or whatever, her loge would be closed. So I'd send Dora on lookout, and she'd come up and say, the coast is clear. And then I would sneak past with a suitcase.
Mm-hmm.
And one time the concierge caught me and told me that if I didn't return that stuff, she was going to call the authorities. So I went back up.
Mm-hmm.
I was already, the stuff was packed and ready for the next time she was out.
Mm-hmm. Do you know, did she ever go in your apartment when you weren't there to do any sort of inventory?
No. She would? No.
No. Anybody?
Not that I know of. But obviously, you know, if they opened the cupboards and found everything gone,
Right.
they would suspect that somebody hadn't been watching very well while somebody else sneaked past with the loot, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, my aunt began talking of returning to her sister. In Auteuil. Her sister had lost the store, but she had managed to lie low.
Mm-hmm.
And she had lived in that apartment building 50 years or whatever, and the concierge was on her side.
Mm-hmm.
She was not registered anywhere.
This was Eleanor?
Eleanor. Mm-hmm. And anyway, Rose would feel safer with her.
Mm-hmm. Rose was beginning to feel exposed in your apartment?
Yes, I think so. And tension arose. And I can't tell you exactly what, started it. Part of it was that she wasn't contributing. Part of it was that she had never truly tried to exercise any control over me, but had she tried, she wouldn't have succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
I was an extremely independent person, and But it became clear, I think, after talking to her, that it was not safe to stay where we were.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow, I don't know through whom, I was put in contact with a Catholic priest of a religious order. Was
As
a
opposed to a parish
Franciscan?
priest?
Yes, a religious order, Franciscan or Augustine or whatever. And I remember it was near Montparnasse. I went to see him at his at his office in the church. Now, who had given me his name? Who had sent me onto him? I don't know. I truly, it's not a matter of not thinking about it enough. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't remember that particular detail. But I know that I went to see him, and I wanted shelter for Dora. I wanted to put Dora in a safe place. So he recommended a Catholic orphanage outside of Paris, about probably 50 miles outside of Paris.
Which direction?
You're disturbing me doing that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was, I think I left from the Gare de Lyon, I can't remember.
So that would have been north?
Gare de Lyon, no, that goes south. But I don't know. It's immaterial.
Oh, Lyon.
Yeah. It's immaterial, I don't
Okay.
Yeah, you know, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
I understand. I'm just trying to think color.
And all I know, it was out in the boondocks.
Mm-hmm.
And I took Dora there. As I said, the idea was, did you see Au revoir les enfants?
If I did, it was a long time ago.
Well, it couldn't have been that long because it's not at all a film. But it was exactly the same situation. I was putting Dora. In Au revoir les enfants, it's a Catholic boarding school. This was more of an orphanage.
Mm-hmm.
And I took Dora there. She wasn't happy, but I don't recall any major scene over that.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, the idea was to put her in safety.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was obvious that we couldn't stay in that apartment for much longer. It was very obvious.
Now, the
Rafle
rafle occurred,
in June of the preceding year.
so this was almost a year later.
Yes, and there were more, arrests were multiplying. Identity checks in the subway, on the street, at the cafe.
And the German presence in Paris had increased several-fold, many-fold?
No.
No?
No.
Also, the identity checks were being carried out by the French?
By the French and the German, but mostly by the French. And whoever they arrested might be turned over to the Germans if they were wanted as resistance.
Mm-hmm.
They might turn, there was a French Gestapo. And they might be turned over, they might turn them over to the French Gestapo or to the German Gestapo. And
When was Jean Moulin arrested?
in 43, I think. Wait a minute, or was it 44? Because it wasn't very far from... had he succeeded in escaping, it was not very far from liberation, so it might be 44.
44?
Yeah. It, you know, these dates, I mean, there were so many things, so many events, I
Right.
don't, you know.
Okay, so you've taken Dora to this orphanage.
I'm taking Dora to the orphanage,